Good morning. We continue the review and summary of the conclusion of Ayin Beis, volume 3, and we are on page 1440, I think. I believe so. Yeah, 1440. And we're learning how the Yichud of Kudsha Brich Shechina, which is a very central theme, especially in Kabbalah, but also we say it in davening, that exists, as he said, ad reim hamaylis. Ad reim hamaylis, starting from the lowest levels all the way to the highest levels. And he's gone through in a progressive way, each level, starting with Atzilus, Malchus of Atzilus as it descends in Biyah, Shechina, and then Malchus of Atzilus in Atzilus. I don't know if he said that is Kudsha Brichu, but I think it appeared that way initially. I believe so. Then Malchus and Zoh, Shechina and Kudsha Brichu respectively. Then Zoh and Bina and Chachma and Keser, Arich, Malchus of Arich. Then Arich itself, two levels of Malchus of Arich and the Midas, the higher Midas of Arich that are removed. And then Arich and Atik. And then the last thing we learned was about Adam Kadmon. That was the last thing. And there too, he also specified it's at least in three levels, the Malchus of Ak, and Etzem of Ak, Chitzenius of Ak, and Pnimius of Ak, and then all of Ak, and the Atik of Ak, which comes from the Kav that followed the Tzimtzum. And then, finally, he said, now the Kav itself, you really think about it, the Kav itself is the ultimate Shechina. Because the Kav, the whole point of the Kav was in order to channel divine energy into an existence that cannot contain the infinite energy as it is before the Tzimtzum. So the whole idea is that it should be subject to Tzimtzum. So the Kav, therefore, is what he calls it. It sounds, he said that, he actually said, is the ultimate Shechina. So why do we call it Kav? Because Kav tells us the manner, the Eifen, he said, of Hamshacha, the manner in which it draws down the energy is like a Kav, like a channel, a line, a channel. But in essence, it's really Shechina, as he explained on page, we learned yesterday on page 1440. Let me see the words exactly. Okay. That's the V'shachanti b'seicham, right? The nimtza ki ikar shem hakav hoyitzarich lahakreis b'shem shchina. So from this we we derive, and this is straight from the language of the Rebbe Marash's Ma'amer V'Kacha, Tafresh Lamed Zayin, as I mentioned. It should have been called Shechina. V'lei nikar b'shem kav rak kidei sheyuven inyan tzimtzumei ba'atzmei. The only reason it's called Kav, in order to understand the process of how it diminishes the light. So a Kav is a good example because it's like a channel. But that's only in order for us to understand the manner of which it's nimshach, it extends. The very Etzem of the Amshach is called Shechina, because that's what it does. What is its ultimate purpose? Not the method of how. What is its purpose? Is to have the Shechina, that the Shechina should rest in the darkness of the Tzimtzum. It shouldn't be an airtight black hole. The Kav radiates it in a way that the existence could be able to contain and receive this light. Similar to the idea of a teacher after he conceals his intelligence. So then he begins to transmit and begins to teach the students. That's the Kav. That's the Hamshach. V'kach yedid v'nimshach b'Atzilus ha'elyon ad sha'arosei nimshach b'klolos neshamas Yisrael. And the Kav, as it travels, so to speak, through Ishtalshalus, it descends and nimshach b'Atzilus ha'elyon, in the higher emanations, to the point that its reflection is nimshach b'klolos neshamas Yisrael. They say v'shachanti b'seich kol echad ve'echad, in the neshamas Yisrael shagam. Actually, we stopped right here. So I'm going to continue reading. So what he's coming now to understand is, comparatively speaking, the Kav now is Shechina. And Kudsha Brich will be the HaOhr Ein Sof, higher than the Kav, which we'll soon learn. But it's still not finished, because remember, we have also HaOhr Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum to address. But that's where he's up to now. Okay. So let's continue reading inside. Right, like around halfway down page 1440. The line is it's HaOhr is nimshach in close neshamas Yisrael. So as neshamas come down below, they have access to this. You can call it, if you like, you can call it. It's like a main line of electricity. You know, when you have electricity in your home, that the electric wires in your home are connected to a main line that connects it all the way to the generators that generate electricity. The Kav is that main artery, essentially. Artery is a good word as well. It's that main artery that everything plugs into. So then it comes down into Neshamas Yisrael. Shagam Neshamas Meruchakim in HaKav. Even though the Neshamas are distant from the Kav. That's why they're subject to concealment. Neshamas come down below. So yes, a neshama inherently has a divine connection, as we learn in Tanya and other places, but it's concealed. So even though neshamas meruchakim are distant from the kav, im kol zeh meir behem ha'oros hakav. Nevertheless, a reflection of the kav radiates within them, and that's why the neshamas have ability and the power to overcome the darkness of whatever they will face as they come down below. Okay, then he continues and he says, "V'oid yesh leimer." We can also say, additionally, shenikra kav b'shem Shechina, that the kav is called by the name Shechina al shem shu hamakabel ma'ir ein sof u'mashpia ben natzalim. So till now he explained, because the kav is a channel, an artery that channels the energy and allows it to be channeled in a form of Shechina, that it resides, it dwells in a particular location, in the Mishkan, b'chol echad ve'echad, ben shnei ba'adei ha'or, etc. He's saying now additional reason, because the kav is a makabel. It's receiving from HaOhr Ein Sof, because where's the kav come from? It's not self-made. The kav, after the tzimtzum, the kav is drawing from the infinite divine light that before the tzimtzum was all-consuming, all-encompassing. The kav is drawing from that, so it's mekabel from HaOhr Ein Sof, umashpia ben natzalim, and then it transmits. So, like I mentioned, like an artery, where it draws from a higher level and then transmits to the natzalim, which are the emanations. U'kamoishin is bar le'il, b'pchinas malchus da'ak, like we learned in the previous page about malchus avak, shemekabel me'ir ein sof mashpia ben natzalim. So we said a similar thing with ak, that ak receives from higher levels, and mashpia ben natzalim, keinu b'chlolis gili hakav. So too, in general, that's the role of the revelation of the kav, of this artery, of this channel, shehu b'chinas mekabel, that it's in a state of mekabel. So this additional nuance. Till now we were saying it's a state that it contains it, and channels it in a particular location. He's emphasizing the word mekabel now. It's in a state of receiving. And that's why it's called Shechina. If I recall correctly, when I taught this the first time, I elaborated at length. What's he coming to add? What is this adding that we didn't know before? Like, what's the point of mekabel? I mean, obviously every lower level receives from a higher level. But it seems like he wants to emphasize something about the Shechina here that's more than just resting, dwelling, that it's actually receiving from a higher level. I remember I spoke about it. I don't remember what I said, to be honest. But, if you want to look it up, you could do that. Maybe I'll remind myself and then I'll share it. Okay. Now, these two reasons, Shechina, one from residing, dwelling, and one from Mekabel, is in V'kocha, from the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Rashab now is going to add a third reason. This is his own addition. So he says like this. I see I wrote that here on the page, on the margin. It says one more thing. V'gam, and additionally, another aspect of why it's called Shechina, V'gam, commission is barley ill, like we learned earlier, the Reishis HaKav, Nasa Atik La'ak. We learned on the previous page that in Eitz Chaim he says that there is a Ka'in, a similar level of like Atik of Atzilus, of Keser of Atzilus. There's a level like that above the skull of Ak. And that's called Atik. And that manifests the Reishis HaKav, the beginning of the Kav. So think of the Kav, as I said, an artery of tremendous amount of energy. Yes, in a channeled way. So the Reishis HaKav becomes Atik for Ak. So just as Malchus of Atzilus, like we learned earlier, becomes the Atik of Bria, because always the Malchus of a higher level always becomes the Keser of the lower level. That's the cloud, that's the rule. So just as it is in Atzilus, I'm sorry, Al Shem Sharasa Nimshach Li Sheikhin Bebriya, because its reflection from Malchus of Atzilus is Sheikhin, is residing, dwelling in Bria. Think of a king, just to give an example. A king is a king no matter whether he has a palace or he doesn't have a palace. He's a king because he's fundamentally a king. But if you build a palace for the king, and that's where he dwells, that's his home, that's where he receives people, so then you would say the king is sheikhin, is dwelling, residing in this place. So in Spheris would be Malchus of Atzilus, is residing and dwelling in Bria. Atika Bria, like he says. He's going to compare it now in a moment to the Kav. He says, and elsewhere explains, the Gam Chinazu Shanasa Atik Libria, that also this level that becomes Atik of Bria, it was a higher level, Malchus of Atzilus, now becomes Atik of Bria. So just again, a simple example, a great teacher has many students. So even his greatest student, that's going to have many of his own students, where does he get his material from? He gets it from his teacher. So Malchus of Atzilus would be the lowest level of his teacher. Atik of Bria is the student who is now this great student, but he's a great teacher of his own, but of Bria, not of Atzilus, because he brought it down a level. So he said now in the parentheses, the Gam B'chinas Du Shanasa Atik L'Bria B'chinas Ashpa B'kiruv. It's Ashpa B'kiruv, not Richuk. It's a transmission close up, the B'chinas Malchus, from the level of Malchus, B'chinas Gili HaTainug, the Neshamas B'Gan Eden Elyon. That's the Gili of his pleasure of Neshamas and Gan Eden Elyon, which is in Bria, generally. And we learned earlier that that's Malchus's ban, like the spirit of the animal that goes downward, in contrast to Adam. So he says, okay, so too in higher levels, so he's adding one more thing now. First he said it's Shechina Kav because it resides in the lower level. That's where the Kav is. The second thing he said from V'kocha, that it is Mekabel, it's a recipient. And the third thing he's saying now is that it is like Malchus of Atzilus becomes Atik of Bria, so Malchus so the Kav becomes Atik compared to Ak, because Ak is Adam the Bria in macrocosm. So just like in the microcosm, Bria receives from Atik of Bria, receives from Malchus of Atzilus, so Atik of Ak receives from Malchus of a higher level, which is the Kav. That's what he's saying here. And its reflection extends to reside in Biyah HaKlolim. Klolim is, as I pointed out, whenever he says Klolim, he's talking the macrocosm, not the microcosm. Sheim Gimel B'chinas Adam, Adam the Bria Ak. That's when Adam the Bria is Ak, Adam the Yetzir is Akudim, and Adam the Asiya is Atzilus the Proteus. And Adam the Asiya is Atzilus in microcosm. Okay. Let me just continue a bit more, then I'll stop for questions. Now the Rebbe Rashab adds, what's the difference between these three reasons? Shechina from dwelling, Makabel, receiving, and now the idea that it is like the Rashis. 1 second, let me see, what was the third reason? V'gam. Yeah, that becomes Atik of Ak. So he says, V'ahefesh ben gimel taimim hanal. The difference in these three reasons that I described of why the Kav is called Shechina, the Latama Aleph, according to the first reason, the Kav, right at the outset of its transmission, is already called Shechina, because it's a Kav. Because its entire function, or its general function, I should say, is to illuminate the darkness of the Tzimtzum. That's what the Kav is. Just like it says, in the beginning the world was covered in darkness, and then Hashem said, Yehi Oyer. So some places it says, Yehi Oyer is the Kav that followed the Tzimtzum. Ulatam HaBeis VaGimel, and according to the second and third reason that we discussed, Hainu Achesh Ekvar Nimshach. Then Kav is called Shechina, not at the outset of its transmission, but we're talking after its Kvar Nimshach. That's when the Kav assumes the properties of what we call Shechina. Now, why is that so relevant? These differences between in the beginning of its transmission and later, obviously in Avodah will make a big difference, because when something is a Shechina from the outset, it's already engaging with existence. According to the second and third reason, it doesn't begin with engaging. It's a Kav, still retains very powerful light, and it's as it continues to manifest, that's when Shechina becomes the title that you use for it. Yeah, that's correct, because he said earlier, it shouldn't have been called Kav, it should have been called Shechina. That's only according to the first reason. According to the second and third reason, it's a Kav before it's a Shechina. That's what it sounds like he's saying. But that too needs explanation, like why is that so relevant? And on a personal Avodah level. So that needs explanation as well. I'm almost sure I spoke about it back then. Okay. The Eich Sheyeh, the Rebbe Rashab says, and however of the three ways you explain it, the Kol HaTaimim, from all these three reasons, move on. Sha'akav nikra Shechina, the Kav is called the Shechina Hein. The Reshis v'tchilas Amshachosei, both in the beginning and at the outset of its Amshacha, the Hein b'aviyose achakach, and as well as it transmits afterwards. Because you could argue that the Shekhinah is only initially. Once the Kav we get used to the Kav, maybe you don't call it Shekhinah anymore. So the three reasons, the first reason explains what it is at the outset, and the second and third is what afterwards. But however you twist it, he says, however you explain it, the Kav is Shekhinah on both levels. And also in its continuing process, its continuing function. Now we get to Kudsha Brichu. So based on this, what's Kudsha Brichu then? So he says the infinite divine light, Pre-Tzimtzum, Shubchinas Iggul HaGadol. That's called the Iggul HaGadol, because it's the Iggul that was formed when the light receded and left a black hole, so to speak, an empty space. So around it, not physically, obviously, conceptually, there's light. That's called the Iggul HaGadol. That's what it's called in Kabbalah. The great sphere, or the great circle. The Iggul HaGadol, yeah. Shalifnei HaKav, that precedes the Kav. Zeu b'chinas Kudsha Brichu. That's the level of Kudsha Brichu. The Kav is Shechina. That's the level of Kudsha Brichu. Li eshazeu b'chinas Atzmus Ein Sof, being this is the level of the core of Ein Sof compared to the Kav. She'ein begeder gili be'elamis. That's not even in the possible range of creating existence. That's why you need a tzimtzum. Because if the light, the Iggul HaGadol, was shining fully, we wouldn't be able to exist. So it's a level that's removed. Kadosh Baruch, Kudsha Brichu. She'ein begeder gili be'elamis, v'hu Kadosh umuvdal. And it's sacred and holy and removed relative to the Kav. So now, Kudsha Brichu and Shechina is Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum of the Iggul HaGadol, namely, and the Kav is the Shechina. Okay, let's stop here. If anybody wants to ask anything, I appreciate your concern about my health, but I thrive on this class and questions. It's not a problem. I'm not struggling to teach or to answer questions, so you don't have to worry about me in this regard. Are there any questions?
I have a question, but I'm afraid to ask until someone else has a chance.
Nothing to be afraid of.
Well, okay, so I'll ask because no one's speaking up. I have a couple questions. The first is like a Chassidus 101 question, but I'll ask anyways. About 11 lines up from the bottom, he refers to the transmission of or through the Kav as Shechina, both as a HaOhr and as a Hashpa'a. So whatever, line 11 is HaOhr and line 10 is Hashpa'a. Can you explain the difference between HaOhr and Hashpa'a? And isn't a HaOhr a more sort of a more mamashi, a more material, if you will, sort of transmission or a movement of or than hashpa, which seems like an influence, or maybe it's the opposite. I'm trying to understand the distinction between a ha'ara of or and a hashpa'a of or.
Well, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think it's two aspects of any transmission. HaOhr emphasizes that it's only a reflection, meaning there's an element of tzimtzum because you can't have the full intensity. So it's only a reflection of a higher level. And hashpa'ah is focusing on its influence on the one that's receiving
I
this
see.
ha'ara, this ha'ara. So I don't know. It's not either or. I think it's just two different aspects to this flow here. In reading it, I mean, I'm looking at it right now. He did say the kav is a makabel, and then he said it's mashpia afterwards. What is it? The Russian was, let's see, makabel. If you go a line before that, you see kav Shem Shechina Shem Shua makabel, Meir Ein Sof mashpia ben atzalim. So makabel and mashpia. I think the
Uh-huh. Where's it
yeah,
coming from? Where's it going? Yeah,
right. And HaOhr describes that it's not the full Etzem, basically. It's like sunlight, not the full sun, so to speak.
understand. Um,
But at the same time, I think that HaOhr, it's not the full
oh,
Etzem, but this is a reflection. This is higher than Hashpa'ah. Hashpa'ah means it's internalizing. It's going in the level of the Mekabel. Correct or not? Real v'shefa.
Well, Hashpah is talking the effect that it's having on the Makabel. And HaOhr does not talk about that. HaOhr just describes what it is. Yes, in that sense, correct. But again, they're not like two levels. They're both correct. They're just describing different aspects of the Kav in this case, or for that matter, any transmission.
another question I had is higher here, where he talks, and you touched on it, which is the source of or the neshamos. Well, I have to find the language. It's about 15 lines up, but
Yeah, I see
basically,
it. Yeah. Nimshal b'klolos neshamas Yisrael. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So the question is, neshamos are rooted higher than the kav, and it again, maybe these are very fundamental questions, but um, which gives us as Yidden, as human beings, which gives us chayas, or is it both the neshama that's from above the kav, or the kav, or is it like the kav is the energizing, vitalizing our substance, our my body, like say the lowest level of the nefesh. I'm not using the right words, but it's energizing my creation. But the neshama is sort of the ruchnius in me. Is it both? In other words, I can't
Yeah,
exist. Yeah.
it's both, but it
Hmm.
goes further than that. When you talk about you have to always distinguish, when you talk about the neshama and its root, especially its highest root, obviously it's higher than the kav, it's even higher than the Iggul HaGadol, it's even higher than Eir saw before the Tzimtzum, but that's its root. But the neshama, to come down to this world, has to go through many tzimtzumim. That's why we say neshama shenasata bi tahirahi atabarasa at yitzarta
Hmm.
nafachta bi. So you're talking two separate things. One is where the neshamas are rooted, and then they go through a process of how they descend and assume the garments of each of these worlds. Like,
Hmm.
when we say, for example, why certain neshamas are neshamas of Atzilus, and then other neshamas, you say, are neshamas of Biyah. They're all rooted in the highest place. It says in Tanya, the Father, in the Tipas Moyach Ha'av, we're the DNA of God Himself. But as he explains in chapter 2 in Tanya, as it comes down through different garments and different filters. And that's where the Kav plays a critical role. Because the Kav is what regulates that flow. So Neshama is not, as much as it's rooted, the Neshama is not a separate track. It comes into existence through the same processes that God uses to create existence. However, the neshama obviously is the purpose of it all.
Hmm.
But okay,
Yeah, and finally, the Eagle HaGadol. It says this is like a softball. It's or makif, right? So the whole Indian there with the kav is the kav is mamale kol almin, but it's nimshach. It's drawn down from the Iggul HaGadol. So this is the idea in general, in the broad sweep of things, of bringing the sovev or the makif into the pnimi, and the kav helps accomplish that. Although I guess our avoda and our birurim ultimately
that is
what's
correct. So it's a form of yichud kudsha bricha v'shchinta. Kudsha bricha would be kaddish or muvdal, like makif, and shchina is more like mamala, pnimi.
Okay, thank you.
He said this more or less when he began the topic. If you go back, right here, top of page 1436, he said like this. He actually brought mamala, seviv and mamala. I don't find it right now, but it's there somewhere on page 1436. Yeah, around a third of the way down the page. Neichach and Nister, that's when he said, who and ata.
How could a Kav be Mamaldi and an HaOhr at the same time?
Well, there's different types of HaOhr. There's a HaOhr that manifests within structure, and there's a HaOhr that is like bligvul, and is a makif that does not manifest within structure. HaOhr by definition can be mamala or seviv.
He mentioned sovev and makif explicitly in the 5 lines from the bottom on 236.
On 1436.
I'm sorry, 1436. The PDF is 236. Sorry.
Oh, it's also closer to the third of the way down. Maybe it's a different structure of the page. Yeah, he says it clearly. Ata and who? Neichach and Nister, right. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Look, when we go back to the interface, which is the theme of Ayin Beis, remember, it's interfacing between the divine as it relates to existence. That's more like mamala kol almin. God on our terms, so to speak. And then there's the divine on God's terms. That's beyond existence, which is more like seviv kol. Okay. Good. Continuing on. Let me just see something. Yeah, we're almost done with the Kudsha, Bricha, and Shchinta levels. He's going to talk a little higher as well. Let's see what he says. V'hine yedua. And now it's known. New paragraph. Bottom of page 1440. The Bechlolos Elemis, the Klolos, the macrocosm, Adam Kabdman, who b'chinas Adam the Bria de Klolos, like we learned before. That Adam Kadman is in macrocosm, like called Adam the Bria, the Klolos means macrocosm. Bria that we usually talk about, Atzilus, Bria, Tzirasiya, that's what's called Adam the Bria de Proteus. Adam the Bria de Klolos is Ak. But Atzilus the Klolos, and what is Atzilus the Klolos when you're talking macrocosm? So you may recall I mentioned, and here he says it explicitly, Hu b'chinas Erein Sof shalifnei Tzimtzum. That's Erein Sof before the Tzimtzum. U'kamesha kosav l'kut Teira ba'abir d'meitzeayim. Like the Alter Rebbe writes, l'kut Teira in the Bir of Meitzeayim, which is a mimer, I believe, in Maseh, Pasha Maseh. Is it Maseh? Yes, yeah. So now, based on that, so whatever we said about Atzilus the Protis, in microcosm, you can now apply to Atzilus the Klolos. So that's ultimately where he's taking us. Kudsha, Bricha, V'shchinta, and the highest levels now. Malchus the Ein Sof. And Malchus of Ein Sof, which means Malchus in the 10 hidden spheres of Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, Nasa Atik La'ak. That will become the Kav. He doesn't say that right here, but he said it a few lines before, which will then become atik of Adam Kadmon, like we learned earlier. Kedugmas b'chinas malchus d'Atzilus shenasa atik libriya, exactly as it is in the microcosm. That atik, that malchus of Atzilus, rather, becomes the atik of Bria de Pratis. Like we learned this just a few lines ago. So you bring the sources for this. Now, is barley ill, and according to what we learned earlier, we're now going back to page 1436, where we started the topic. You recall, the b'chinas malchus d'Atzilus gam k'moishi hi b'Atzilus nikra Shechina, the malchus of Atzilus, even the way it is in Atzilus, is called Shechina. Mepnei she'isherish she'makid the b'yasha b'Atzilus, because it's the root and source of biyah in Atzilus. Im kain yesh leimer. So based on that, you can say the kamoy kain in macrocosm. B'chinas malchus the Ein Sof, malchus of Atzilus the Klolos, which is malchus of Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. Gam kamoy lifnei Tzimtzum, even as it is in before the Tzimtzum, harizeh b'chinas Shechina. That's the level of Shechina. So now we've moved up. No more is, not only is the Kav Shechina, now he's saying Eirei Sof lifnei Tzimtzum of Atzilus the Klolos is the Shechina. Just like Malchus in the microcosm is the Shechina, like we learned earlier. The Ayin Beis, it tells us to look in the Maimer, the beer of Re'isi. I think that's a Ba'aleischa Maimer. The Malchus the Ein Sof Shemesham Hamshachas HaKav. The Malchus of Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, from where the Kav originates. As we know, the Kav, even though there was a hefsek, a pause of the Tzimtzum, but once the Kav began to transmit, it's not transmitting some other light. It's coming from before the Tzimtzum, from Malchus of Ein Sof. Like he says in Eitz Chaim, that's the level of Asiyah. That relatively speaking, in Atzilus the Klolos itself is the Asiyah within Atzilus the Klolos. That's Malchus. It's the lowest level in Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. Like we already learned earlier what that means. What it means, lowest level, doesn't mean there are no levels there. But he explained lowest means that it's not the ikar of Elikus, that light or energy or creation comes from him. So it's considered literally like negligible. It's completely irrelevant compared to the high levels that exist before the Tzimtzum. Say irrelevant may not be the right word. More like completely nullified. V'hainu, and that means that the infinite divine light pre-Tzimtzum, relatively speaking, that's how God, before the Tzimtzum, is relating to existence. He's envisioning existence. And this we learned earlier. As we learned earlier, commotion is barely ill, become mekamus, like we learned a number of times. There's the extension of Eir before the Tzimtzum, and Yesh Bechinas Ubchinas Etzem Eir, and there's the core Eir, which is to himself. Espashtus Eir means as he's beginning to associate and envision existence. The Bechinas Espashtus Eir Ubatzmusei Kav Yochel, Bechinas Hameir El Azulas. Relatively speaking, in the Etzem itself, meaning before the Tzimtzum, it says he's radiating to another. We learned earlier that it's like dibur, speech. Before the Tzimtzum, there's a level that's called speech. Speech is as you speak to someone else, but there's no one there to speak to, so it's only a mashal, it's only an example. And at this level, this we learned all this earlier. That's where it arose in his desire, God's desire. But it's saying that it arose in his desire to emanate and to create. And here he envisioned and allocated resources of what will come later, as we've learned at length a number of times. So now, before the Tzimtzum itself, this level is already associating, and therefore called Shechina, with existence. But obviously, there is no existence yet. So it's all within the Godhead, within God, Kav Yachol. Valkein. I'm sorry. Mashenka b'chinas Etzem HaOhr. By contrast, the core HaOhr, hu hamel atzmei. That's the HaOhr that radiates to himself, not for another. That's God, so to speak, manifesting in expression, in definition, but not relating to existence. That's why on this extension of the HaOhr, for the Tzimtzum, you could say, it's a level of Shechina. And in general, this is the level of the lowest level of HaOhr Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum of Ein Sof. That's the HaOhr that's called Shmoi. Like we learned, Shmoi is already like letters associated with some definition. Sha'amar b'Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar, upon which the Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar describes, Actualize nivra elam hayohu u'b'Shmoi belvad, as we learned, that before creation, he who is beyond. Shmoi was there. Shmoi is already associating. A name is a definition, is a description. So it existed. Shmoi belvad. The Shmoi b'chinas Eir Ein Sof. V'nikra b'chinas Achrena mishum deloi zeu ikra lakus. Here we go. And why is it called Achrena when there are no levels there? Because that's not the ikra of Elikus. Masha Elis misavim menu. It's like saying that an artist, it's not the ikar of God to be an artist. So therefore, when he is an artist, it's only a b'chinas achrena. It's like an outer expression of infinite possibilities and infinite elements that he has. That's altogether beyond any description. U'kamesha kosav ba'bir d'shcheirani u'kamesha is barely ill. Like he explains in the Maimer, the bir shcheirani is shir hashirim. And as we discussed earlier, I have here written, page 1407 and 1421. For close b'chinas Shmoi, at this general level called Shmoi here, who b'chinas zeu b'chinas Shechina. That's the level called Shechina, relatively again speaking. Shari Hashem hu hagili el Atzilus. Because a name, you don't need a name for yourself. A name is a handle for someone else to call you by that name. V'im came b'chinas Shmoi HaGadol, shezeh b'chinas HaOhr Ein Sof hu b'chinas Shechina. So based on this, relatively speaking, Shmoi HaGadol, that's the level of the Shechina. And what's Kudsha Brichu? The Kudsha Brichu hu b'chinas Atzmus, shelamayla b'chinas HaOhr v'gili. That's the level of the core essence that's higher than any form of expression and revelation. Gam b'Atzmus Kav Yachol, also Kav Yachol, so to speak, within the Etzem itself. Hu b'chinas Hashem hakol b'Atzmus. If you recall, this is the shame as it's encompassed in Atzmus. Hu v'Shmoi and Shmoi hu, that there's no shame yet. It's just the potential for a shame. So Kudsha Brichu b'chinas Atzmus Shalman b'chinas HaOhr v'gili gam b'Atzmus v'hu b'chinas Hashem hakol b'Atzmus. Mamash she'ela b'chinas hamshacha v'gilui klal. That's not at all a form of transmission or revelation. Mina Atzmus, from Atzmus. U'kameshin is barely ill, as we learned earlier. U'b'chinas zu hi b'chinas Kudsha Brichu. And this level is called Kudsha Brichu. So there we go. He finished now this topic. Literally, Kudsha, Brich, and Shechina, all the way Adurema Milas, from Bria, the microcosm, all the way through Atzilus, to Ak, the Kav, and Lifnei Tzimtzum, as we just learned. That sums up the last few pages that began on top of page 1436. Now we're at 1441, basically in the last 5 pages. I'm going to stop here, because now he's going to go back to mitzvahs and to Shema, which is why we say the Yachid Kudsha Bricha V'Shchinta through mitzvahs and through Shema, as we'll discuss. I'm going to stop here. Any questions?
Again, if no one's gonna ask any question, I'll ask one question.
Go ahead.
I didn't understand.
HaOhr
Go ahead, Rabbi Tachtel, please. Go ahead.
HaOhr HaMeir LeAtzmo, this is Shechina, right?
No, that's Kudsha Bricha.
That was actually one of my questions. What does it mean? Well, I understand what it means literally, that the Atzmus is shining within itself and not externally. But then, how does the light get out? There is a HaOhr, but it says if it's a ma'ir la'atzmo, then it is a HaOhr la'atzmo. Where does the Or Ein Sof come from directly? If the initial transmission of light is only to himself.
Why does she? I mean, that's what God wants. First, He wants a level that is just relates to Himself. Then He wants to manifest in a level like light, just like the sun has light within the sun. Then there's the light that the sun gives off and shines to earth.
I see. And that's the beginning of expression?
Well, the beginning of expression is the very concept of HaOhr altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Like we learned earlier, if you remember, he spoke about Shmoy, Shemus, Lashon Rabim, Shem, Lashon Yachid. Then he spoke about Yechelis, Shem HaKol, Atzmus. So we spoke there at length. There's how it is all within Atzmus capacity. He has the Yechelis to do everything. But that's Atzmus. He wants us to relate to it and be able to experience it. And therefore, that's why you have these levels. Because each level is basically why you have Shechina in the first place. Shechina is the tool which God uses to bring down, like he said, a Yurida to a level below itself. Like he said before about Shechina. Shechina is, what's the expression he used? Shish Shechinas. Let's see here. Right? I'm looking for a particular lashon. Oh, here we are. Now, to create existence as we have it, obviously God can do whatever He wants, but to make sense of it and for us to be able to retrace the steps, Shechina plays the role of the divine as it relates to existence. Question is, what level you're talking about? You're talking about Atzilus, you're talking about before the Tzimtzum. That's the distinction between all the different levels he spoke about.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll stop here by the line V'zeh inyan ramach pikudin. Stop there. Yeah. Any other questions?
I was just going to say how exquisite this is and how seamless the logic is. And, well, you can say how seamless God's expression is. These different layers of Shechina and Kudsha Bricha and the notion of Achdus and Yichudim is intensified by this dissection of the way God manifests and brings light into creation, into our from the highest level the lowest level, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah, it could also help us understand the theme of this year's Basiligani from Tafshim Memhei, 1985, and also the Maimer Chamish Asher B'Shvat, the Rebbe spoke about it that year too. I spoke about it on Sunday night because the Tzimtzumim before the Tzimtzum Arishin is in different words, these levels. That Shechina goes up all the way to the highest levels.
100%.
So, though he doesn't use the word Tzimtzumim before the Tzimtzum Arishin, but the concept is similar.
Yes, no, I had that in the back of my mind the whole time. I was
Yeah.
thinking about this.
Good.
Is there a place where the Rebbe or a Rebbe draws that direct connection, the one that you just said, that these
No,
different levels?
Because nobody spoke about the Tzimtzum before the Tzimtzum Arishin. The Rebbe said this is very rarely discussed.
I see.
So the Rebbe spoke about it in 1985. But once he did, you can extrapolate and you can make the connections.
Thank you.
You see here, the Rebbe Rashab is talking about this inyanim.
Yeah. The point is that our connection to God goes all the way to the highest levels. Because you could have argued, as the Rebbe says in the Sichos of Memhei, that you know what? Shechina stops by Ak, or even by Atzilus, or by the Kav. Who says you have access to Shechina before the Tzimtzum? You could hypothetically, that God could have said, Shechina starts after the Tzimtzum. The fact that we have Shechina before the Tzimtzum is telling us that as much as before the Tzimtzum is so beyond us, but relatively speaking, God implanted levels that obviously very, very distant from us, but relatively speaking, we could relate to. That's why he compares Atzilus the Proteus, Atzilus the Klolos. That as it is a microcosm, that's how it is a macrocosm. So it's very eloquent in that sense.
Does the neshama? This is a little off, but we're at the end of the class. Does the neshama? Here we are sitting as human beings, flesh and blood, able to contemplate these highest levels of elokus. My question is: does the neshama, after 120 years, and then ultimately, Mirz Hashem goes to Gan Eden, even in Gan Eden Elyon, as high as the neshama can go in a location of, let's say, the Seder Ishtalshalus, can the neshama contemplate these levels, or is it sort of stuck? I mean, God forbid, how to say stuck in Gan Eden? It's not such a bad place to be stuck. But does the neshama have a mochin, a capacity to contemplate like we are here, or is it just sort of reveling in all the or and all the godliness?
To some extent, it revels in the Giluyim, but it knows the Mishnah says Yofasha Achas. B'tshuva ma'asim tevim be'elam hazim akol chai elam haba. At the end of the day, the Neshama knows that it's only down in this world that you really can reach Atzmus mamish, because that's where Hashem wanted a dira b'tachtenim. So you'd have to say it's like a Baal Tshuva may be higher than a tzaddik, but a tzaddik can appreciate what a Baal Tshuva is, even though he's not a Baal Tshuva himself. So you can say that the Neshamas above have some appreciation, even though they're not on that level. But that's what we learned earlier. Mashiach, also lasovet tzaddikai b'tiyufta, Mashiach will also cause the tzaddikim to do tshuva. So at the end of the day, because the neshamas come down below, they come to realize and experience these higher levels. So really, you need both. It's like we need Giluyim and we need Etzem. Etzem is experienced mostly in this world because it's higher than Gilui altogether. Giluyim are experienced in the higher worlds, Gan Eden and so on. And you really need both. That's the ultimate answer.
Yeah, that's heavy. Wow. But the neshama does take its Torah learning with it, right? So, I mean, God, I hope, God's willing, I'll take
for sure
this class with me.
Whatever neshama, look, then there's a lot of aspects to this. The neshama will take its learning and its mitzvahs, but it's also going to take its mesiras nefesh, the struggles we had. Remember, Torah and mitzvahs, as high as they are, we're going to learn neshamas through their mesiras nefesh and krishma reaches even a higher level. So you really need everything. Bottom line, everything contributes to each other.
It's so beautiful. It's so touching. For me, anyways.
No, it is. Yeah, it is.
What do you mean to the Mesiras Nefesh of Krishna? Poshet in physical things when a person is davening, or you have the potential if you davening in the way it should be?
Well, mesiras nefesh, thank God, it can be mesiras harotzen. Like Rabbi Akiva said, that all his life he was aspiring mesiras nefesh, Hashem echad. It doesn't have to come Rahman al like it happened to Rabbi Akiva, but mesiras nefesh really is only shaykh in this world, because in the higher worlds there's no resistance. You don't really have a hell and a hester like down here. So the fact that a person overcomes the challenges of life, and the darkness, has a tremendous power that reaches into the Etzem. That's why I said, Yofer Sha'achal b'tshuva ma'asim tevim ba'ilam hazeh v'kol chai ilam hab. But it's a bigger topic, and it's part of the bigger theme that we've learned, where you need everything. You need Giluyim, you need Etzem, you need the Etzem b'Gilui, and they all come together.
And even Helam.
Absolutely, absolutely. You'll see, obviously I'm writing it up now, but you'll see when we get down to Ner Mitzvah v'Torah which helps support the neshama Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. So the neshama needs that outside light, like we said, it needs a light to shine in the dark, because we can't see in the dark. But on the other hand, the neshama is going to reach a place that's much higher than Torah and mitzvahs. And we'll see how it all comes together, where you need all three. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, it's support of Ner Mitzvah, support of Torah It's all going to come together. Yeah. Okay, we'll stop here. A third of the way down on page 1441, the line that begins Kudsha Brichu v'Zenya Ramach Pekudin. We'll continue tomorrow. Let me end the recordings.